Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to yet another edition of Truth to Power. My name is Src Patel. I'll be in your company for the next 45 to 50 minutes. Well, last week we had a conversation about the 2021 edition of the Fees Must Fall movement. And of course, again, it cast another dark light on the higher education sector here in South Africa. And what is the way going forward to the erasing of potential student debt and allowing students to be registered for the new academic year? Well, we did try to get hold, of course, of two institutions to join the conversation. The one was NSFAS, and the other was, of course, the Higher Education Department. Unfortunately, we were not successful. But joining this conversation, and of course, we are looking to have more guests coming in later during the show. I have with me the CEO of Universities of South Africa, Professor Ahmed Bauer. Professor Bauer, assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us here on Truth to Power.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you so much for having me, Farah.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Professor Bauer, let's start, of course, what has happened in these last few weeks. Of course, the student protests, we saw the heavy hand of police brutality. In an institution like yours, when you look at it from afar, do you feel that the situation could have been handled differently to try and find an amicable solution with regards to all of this?
I think that's a very fair question, and I think it's an important question. One of the things I think that we could have done better, is to have worked with government sort of last year to deal with the issue of student debt. I mean, we knew that this was an issue. It's a perennial problem. I mean, at the universities, at the universities of technology and at the historically disadvantaged institutions, this has been going back. This goes back 20 years or so. So that's the one issue, I think, which is that we could possibly, had the government taken the initiative, we could possibly have kind of brought about some kind of approach to this, which might have made it easier. The second thing, of course, is just the need for us to develop kind of systems in South Africa amongst our police and other security agencies to try and understand how to kind of do crowd control better and how to manage demonstrations better. The right to activism and the right to demonstrations and so on is totally enshrined in our constitution. It's the nature of democracy. And then we need to have systems in place that ensure that if these have to be brought under some level of control, and so that it's done without injury and without harm to people. And so certainly there are things that we could have done better. I want to just also mention that that the introduction of the new NSFAS financial aid program in 2018 clearly has had a massive impact on the lives of young South Africans, especially those that come from poor and working class backgrounds. And I think that we have to recognize that. But at the same time, I think that we also raised the question in 2017, 2018 about the long-term viability of that program. And now, of course, it's become clear, in fact, that as a nation and in terms of this particular economy, that may not be the case. So I think what I'm trying to say is that as a nation, we dropped the ball after 2018. We got one part of the student sector kind of and families kind of dealt with, if you like, in terms of student funding. And on the other side, we just simply ignored the fact that there was still a very significant number of students who were outside of that NSFAS threshold in family income, which has resulted in this chaos this year.
Professor Bauer, one of the interesting conversations, and of course this was a two-part sort of series within this show. When we spoke to SASCO last week, of course, one of the oldest student organizations in South Africa, and one of the gripes that they had is that when, of course, National Treasury was allocating a budget for, of course, various sectors, the SOEs, of course, took preference when we look at the SAA, for example, as being one of them, and there was a small budget that was allocated for higher education. When you look at that, you feel that surely there has to be a priority on education. Yes, of course, SOEs have the huge role to play, but surely there has to be a sort of prioritization for students and student funding to get them into universities and, of course, whatever courses they would like.
Yeah. So, what I've heard our minister argue, and he argues it very pertinently and with a lot of passion and so on, is that that the commitment of the government is to fund students that come from poor and working class backgrounds. Now, of course, the definition of that is that it's students that come from families where the total family income, the annual income, is in the region, is below 350,000 rand. So the minister will argue, and he argues this effectively, that for that category of students, NSFAS plays that role, and the government has committed itself to doing that, and it does that. Of course, the challenge is that if a family has an annual income of 355,000 rand a year, then that family will fall outside of that NSFAS threshold, if you like. And of course, the capacity of that family to meet the needs of the students who wish to study is very limited. So it seems to me, at least, Farhaz, what we really need is a national system of student funding that caters for all of our students. Now, I'm not suggesting that there should be bursaries for every student in our society. I don't know whether we can afford that. It just depends which economist you speak to. And of course, there's corruption and all of that. Right? So, but having said that, I think that what we really do need is a national system that caters for all the students in the system. So whether it's a mixture of bursaries and loans, or whether it's purely loans, or whatever the case might be, what we need is a national system to cater for the needs. So, and I think that I should emphasize, that the student debt at the moment to universities is in the region of 14 billion rand. And this is by no means kind of monopoly money. It's money that should be going into improving student-staff ratios, building new infrastructure, improving the cyber infrastructure of the system, and so on. So we really are in a fix. And in our last meeting with the minister, there was a very clear kind of understanding that we received, at least, that the minister was going to establish a national kind of task team to address this issue of a long-term national student funding system. And that's something that I think we all have to work towards, because otherwise we face this crisis at the beginning of every year.
I'd like to bring into the conversation Siyabusa Mnisi. He's the SRC Deputy President at the University of Johannesburg. Good evening, Siyabusa. Thank you so much for joining us. Siyabusa, I just want to get, of course, with the University of Johannesburg, what has been happening there. I know that a lot of the attention has been shifted to, of course, the university up the road in Braamfontein. That is, of course, the University of Witwatersrand. But what has been the activity of the SRC with regards to, putting the word out there that students need help, especially in a difficult economic condition that we are facing in?
All right. No, thank you very much for having me. Specifically, there's something that we must note between VETS and UJ differently is the type of students that UJ has, the type of students that VETS has. For example, on the affordability side, you find that in VETS, the system of NSFAS is not working for the majority because most of them are the middle class and those who could not get funding in terms of NSFAS because they fall above the threshold that the minister had given out. But then in UJ, we face an issue of many students are NSFAS funded. So the issues that we have would most of them be NSFAS based. That NSFAS has unfunded 5,000 students. We experienced much more effect than VETS because VETS had less NSFAS students, but we had more. So you find that some students were unfunded at the middle of the year, and one of the reasons would be that, no, we discovered that they are funded, but they are above the threshold. And then when the students appeal, you find that, no, it's actually not true that they are above the threshold. They are now unfunded, they come back, they can't register, they need to be unblocked financially. It's just a mess and a problem. And it's affecting thousands and thousands of our students in the University of Johannesburg. And that has been the biggest crisis that we have faced in the University of Johannesburg, apart from the issue of first years and admissions. But for returning students, it was specifically that one of unblocking the students financially, because we wouldn't be sure on whether they are funded or they are not funded for this academic year.
Well, we will be continuing this conversation after the break. Do stay tuned to Truth to Power. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Our conversation today is, of course, can we have a road to free decolonized education, and of course getting our students, without having the burden of student debt, for them to go ahead and complete their studies at their respective universities. Siyabuza, I want to take this question to you. Have the SRC have been talking to, obviously, the higher powers of the university in trying to, especially the one of getting the first-year students registered and, of course, getting them studied? I know there's been contestation with regards to that. So what has the SRC done in terms of trying to at least get the first-year students registered and getting them, of course, studying for their respective courses?
Luckily, with the University of Johannesburg in recent years, we had already established an Src Trust Fund. So what the Src Trust Fund does, it covers the registration fees and accommodation registration fee. So to assist the student just to enter into the system. For example, we have a plenty of students who could not afford the registration fee. So what we do is that we help them apply for it at the beginning of the year. And then we actually work together with the SDP responsible for that to get them approved the same day, so that they can register quickly before the space is moved to another applicant. So that is the way that we have used for first years to be admitted if they happen not to have the registration fees.
Professor Bauer, I want to take the question to you. The first point that obviously Siyabuza mentioned about the thresholds of NSFAS. Now, he brought up a very interesting point, is that if you're above the threshold and you already into your third semester of your third part of your semester, it does make things a bit difficult, doesn't it? That when you're now being told by NSFAS that you're above the threshold, it does really sort of, hinder the studying of the certain student that, of course, is affected by it. So, of course, this would have been a question that I would have raised with NSFAS. And in your point of view, Professor Bauer, what needs to be done from NSFAS to make sure that when these registrations of student funding does occur, that they can differentiate between the certain thresholds, whether it is above or below?
Yeah, no, I think that it's totally unacceptable for NSFAS to kind of really change its decisions sort of midway. I mean, that does seem to me to be unacceptable. Look, I mean, this is really a question that NSFAS must answer, I think, and I would really implore you to get them to answer this question. Their argument is that the data that was provided to NSFAS wasn't accurate data, and that, on the basis of the data that was provided, when they did a check, then they found that the data was... Now, you have to confirm that with NSFAS. I can't answer for them. But I think what we have to get to, the point we have to get to, is that, at the start of the academic year, students that have been admitted by the universities who need NSFAS funding must be covered, right? So that there's no kind of, challenge around, for students to run around looking for money and so on. They from day one, they need to be focused on their studies, focused on being at university, focused on experiencing the university. And that does mean, in fact, that the system that ensures that, that the system has to ensure that there's articulation between the admission of students to universities and the funding that needs to go along with that. Now, there has been some progress in that regard, but this year, unfortunately, NSFAS was not able to provide universities with the funding to for student allowances and so on because of its own challenges and its own funding challenges. And hence, I mean, I think that there might well be the challenge this year of students not receiving their allowances. What the universities are doing is they are trying to use some of their own money to provide students with living allowances and so on, in the interim period to make sure that students can get on with studying.
And Professor Bauer, you just heard obviously what Siyabuza mentioned about the UJ Src Trust Fund. I don't know if other universities are following suit. I know that the UJ has done it. Of course, I studied in UJ a very long time ago, and I was preview to what was happening at that university, and I always believed that it was a good system. But do you think that when looking at that system, where you have the SRC taking the initiative, being proactive, that is the start of something where you can see funding for students, be it either small or big?
No, I think that's, one has to congratulate SRCs that are doing this because I think it's really important. And of course, clearly it's not it's not the solution to the problem, but it really does help, if you like, to address the challenges being faced by students. I know that Wits University this year has got a similar program. UCT has a similar program. I was the Vice Chancellor at Durban University of Technology, and I can remember there at the beginning of every year, the SRC would take some of its allocated funding to use for this purpose of getting students registered and so on. So this is something which is, has to be applauded because it's an initiative being taken by students to cater for other students. And I think that that's something that we need much more of in our country. I don't mean just in terms of our students, but I think generally speaking in our society. We need this act of giving, this act of committing oneself to the betterment of colleagues and fellow students and so on.
Siyabuza, I want to turn the question to you. I think what's interesting is that we are already 3 months, heading obviously 4 months into the year. The mood currently at the University of Johannesburg, of course, I can't ask you about other universities, but the mood right now, I mean, talking to your fellow colleagues, talking to the SRC, what is the mood like, especially what has happened in the last few weeks with student protests and everything that has happened?
We are actually pained as the SRC. We feel like to our target we have failed because, I mean, the NSFAS processes were supposed to have dealt with the financial issues of students at the beginning of the year to ensure first years are registered. There's a lot of first years that lost their space because they were waiting for a list from Central Western Cape NSFAS to send a list to the University of Johannesburg so they can be unblocked to register. So they did not register. Those who had money paid and registered and took their space, and we are actually pained by that. But with the returning students, we have tried to do an internal vetting of our own to ensure that our returning students are registered. What we do is that we look on whether the student has more chances to be funded this year again. How do we look at that? We look on whether the student has been funded for how many years, whether the student has studied in any other university previously, which would maybe create a situation where this year they would not be funded because they've exceeded the number of years to be funded. And we look on whether the student has passed all modules from the previous year. If the student maybe is now doing second year, third year, and they've never studied before, and they passed all their modules, we propose that, no, let them be unblocked because the chances of them being confirmed to be funded this year are extremely high. So we facilitated that and tried by all means to get our returning students registered. Allowances have started to be dispersed to them by the NSFAS office here. We know that the university is using money in its own coffers because of delays of NSFAS, and we appreciate that we're trying by all means. But then the issue of the first years, we are really paid because we see them on a daily basis coming, having an acceptance letter, but the moment they try to register, even after they pay the registration fee, the system says that quota full, meaning that already the maximum people for this course expected are already registered, but they still have an acceptance letter. So the system was a little bit flawed, and we are really pained that a lot of poor students have been this year in the University of Johannesburg excluded from the system.
And the fact that the systems are flawed, the fact that those students who had spent so much of money, especially the poorer students from the rural areas, are not able to go ahead and get access to their education, all because of one systematic flaw. Well, we will be continuing this conversation. Do stay tuned to Truth to Power. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Let us continue this conversation with regards to decolonize free education. Are we on the road to it being achieved? Siyabusa, I want to take the question to you. We've seen obviously what has happened in the last few weeks. I know that it's been Wits University, of course, laid the seed for those protests to happen. But as somebody with the same age group, as somebody who has seen what has happened, just describe to us the emotions that you have felt at that moment, seeing what had happened, seeing your fellow students, really basically begging for there to be education that should be free, that was promised by the government 2 decades ago.
We are actually pained. It's painful, especially for me. I am the provincial convener of Gauteng in the FF Students Command. So the branch that we have at VETS is also under our custodian. So we receive these complaints from them. Even the support, we appoint the national secretary to go and assist there because they've been facing these issues. And it's tough. The reason why, I think I've stated it before, on why you saw VETS being the first one to come forward with this thing, it's the number of students that they are facing with historical debt.
Yes.
Because they have most of their students, I think the former VC, Prof. Adam Habib would attest to say that when he looked at the stats at that time, more were falling within the middle class and less from 100%, less were falling within NSFAS. So most of the challenges would be those ones of historical debts. And that was the issue that brought the vibrance in VETS to ensure that they start fighting first because they felt the effects first. And later to us in UJ, you find that there are these mechanisms of assisting the students who are owing. I mean, we are trying with external bursaries to assist, internal bursaries to assist, Src Trust Fund to assist. So we could not just come out like that, but we only came out onto the streets because of the admission process of first years. That was the main priority that we fought so hard for because we so wish that the enrollment rate, especially as a 4R institution, did not see it logically reasonable for students to be excluded from that. But we still feel that the fight must continue for free, quality decolonized education. But now a framework, we also internally in ourselves question ourselves to say we need to advance into this level and argue upon ourselves to come up with constructive ideas to say how is it going to be practically possible on the actual system for it to occur. So we can't say that we want free decolonized education, but we do not have a proper spectrum and a proper plan on how we are going to implement it. We have had a few suggestions with the VCs, but remember, it is a national issue and the VCs have a certain role, but they are not the decision makers of that. So to some extent, our call is ahead, our cry is ahead. We see others are responding, even influential politicians are responding, but the call is really not implemented. One of those reasons is because they actually say that there is no budget for that. And we don't have a constructive way in the economic system to say how we're going to fully cater for free education. So we are still also trying to come up with constructive ways, but we believe that if the government could just move funds from other sectors there and there, try by all means, and even if necessary, increase the tax and call it, for example, an educational tax. I mean, they did it from 14%. One of the most influential decisions was to fund NSFAS more so that higher education can be easily accessible. We went from 14% of that to 15% of that. So we think that if the government is serious, this government, if it's serious, it can implement such.
Professor Power, as what Siyabusa is mentioning right over there, and this is a question, of course, I asked you at the start, it didn't need to come to a point where students had to go to a street for something that could have been done immediately. This could have been executed by your NSFAS, by Higher Education Department, by government itself. And of course, Professor Bauer, you were around, and I'm not giving your age, but you were around, obviously, during the 70s when student protests, of course, took full control of trying to get the attention of the then apartheid government. But it's not supposed to be like this in democracy, isn't it?
Yeah, look, and first of all, I think one has to accept, if we have a system which prevents students from studying because they can't afford to study, after they're admitted to university, it's completely contrary to the purpose of universities.
Yes.
Universities are really designed to kind of provide the basis for social mobility, for producing more equal societies, and so on. So it's totally antithetical to the idea of a university to have systems which have a system in place which excludes young people because they can't afford to be. So, and hence this request to the minister, that we really need a national task team now to produce a national model for student funding which covers all students, not just students who are in a particular category. So I want to also just sort of indicate that the big NSFAS challenge this year was a shortfall in the funding of NSFAS for this year. I mean, by the way, we knew that this shortfall was going to take place last year. And when the Minister of Finance, gave the budget speech, there was a one-line throwaway, which is that the financial aid system will be properly funded so that students can. It was just a one-liner. Now, of course, it turned out that there was a 6.4 billion rand shortfall for NSFAS. Then it was left to the Department of Higher Education and Training within its own budget to begin to find the money for that allocation. And where does that money come from, right? So the money comes from the National Skills Fund, which means that there's less money now for skills development. And it comes from the university's budget. It comes from the subsidy, infrastructure grants, earmarked grants, and so on. So funding that was meant to go into the proper functioning of the universities has now been taken out and put into the NSFAS pot. So, it's like, we're solving one problem but creating another problem,
Yes.
So we need a national system that's properly geared, that's properly kind of sustainable and so on, which kind of makes sure that, that students who qualify to be at a university and who are admitted to a university can study at a university without kind of being prevented from doing so because of their financial condition.
Siyabuza, I want to move the question to you. Of course, there is this plans to go ahead and have this discussion. The requests are there for higher education to design this framework for there to be a pathway to free decolonized education. But then you get the minister making comments like, these fees must fall movements has more drama every single year. Siyabuza, from a student's perspective, when you're looking at it, do you have faith in the current higher education department that they can go ahead and deliver on those promises, and of course deliver should the framework be presented to them?
Yeah, look, oh, sorry.
No, it's for Siyabuza. You can answer that question later, Professor. Siyabuza first.
All right. Thank you, Prof. So I do not have faith in the Blade administration at all. I do not think that Blade would drive us to free decolonized education, at least in our lifetime. I don't think it's ever going to happen because it's clear that it doesn't believe in it at all. In all aspects, it doesn't believe in it. I mean, Blade wanted to exclude 20,000 students, first-time entering students from the University of South Africa, UNISA. We took him to court, and then the court ordered in our favor. And therefore, it shows that even the courts can attest to us to say, but Blade is not the proper candidate for this. I mean, how did he not recognize that this was inappropriate to an extent that is brought to court, and he still go and defends and oppose in court, and they rule against him? It shows that really there is no faith Even the judiciary has proven it, that there is no faith in blade administration. We don't know, maybe somewhere, somehow, there will be a God, whichever that we don't know, that will touch in his heart and try to ensure that he changes the current status quo of that man, because he's really not prepared to assist anything. He is not prepared. I don't believe in nothing at all.
Professor Bauer, you're hearing the frustrations from Siyabuza. Of course, you know, both you and I, Professor, were students in our respective fields. When you put the shoes, of course, if you put our shoes into the shoes of Siyabuza and so many millions of other young South Africans who want to study, surely you can understand the frustration at the current government and the higher education department.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty sure if I was in the position of a student, as indeed we were, 20, 30, 40 years ago, I would have been on the streets as well. So, I understand the frustration. But I just want to make a point, that I don't think that this is a function of, the reluctance of the current minister to make progress. I mean, I think this is really about the nature of South Africa's economy. It's about what we argue to government is that they really have to see the university system, the TVT sector, basic education. We have to see these as areas of investment rather than as areas of expenditure. You're investing in the future of the country. You're investing in the future of young people. What I am aware of is just the extent to which Minister of Higher Education Training now, Minister Nzibande, had an ongoing battle with the Treasury, in trying to understand how to lever kind of resources for the higher education sector, in particular for NSFAS. So I think that it's really about the nature of the economy, and that that there's a kind of sense in which higher education and the TVT sector and basic education are really seen as expenditure lines. They're kind of seen as something that needs to be kind of really controlled in terms of their funding and so on. So for me, it's really about saying, what is the imagination we have of our national future, and what do we have to invest in to make that imagination come true? It's so interesting to hear the president and and the other ministers speak about the impact of our research, on the COVID-19 pandemic and on the vaccine program and whatever else, all the things that we speak about, we hear the president speak about, and yet we have a massive cut to research funding this year. So what's the story? Do we want a good research system or don't we want a research system? So this is it's really a question of national imagination. Just what kind of society do we want for our future?
Well, we'll be continuing this conversation and wrapping it up immediately after the break. The topic, of course, the roadmap to free decolonized education, and can it be achieved in our lifetime? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Let's wrap up our conversation with regards to the roadmap to free decolonized education, and can it be achieved in our lifetime? Siyabuza, I want to come to you. Of course, dialogue with government is something that I'm sure students, student organizations, and of course, so many other youth in the country want to have a conversation with. Of course, you get your qualification, whatever it may be, you want to go ahead and you want to work in contributing to the economy of South Africa. So what would your intention be should you be given the opportunity to go ahead and talk with government, talk with higher education, to go ahead and find that roadmap to achieve free decolonized education in our lifetime? Because I think the last thing everyone wants is to have it in the next generation. So how do we achieve it in this current generation right now?
It's obvious, the sooner we get to engage about it, the sooner we are going to get free decolonized education in our lifetime. I mean, I think it's coincidental, this question. Early January, before I assumed office, I wrote to the VC of UJ and I asked him to say, but can we this year at least have engagements and discussions where we open to dialogues, to ideas, and find a way on how we can internally say that we have contributed as an institution to some type of a way to ensure that all the best interests of students are represented in all sectors, even whether financially, academically, and psychologically in all aspects. Those were the aspects that we looked at. But I did not get a response on that one. But I believe that it might have came from good faith because this is a busy and all other issues. But I do believe that if we start engaging about such issues, it would actually create a situation where we are able to understand each other. I feel like even the Department of Higher Education, the problem there is just the attitude. They are not open to discussing. And they think that when we discuss about this, it's about them as a person. It's about the department as a whole. Even if they remove Blade today, we can have another person there and they will still do the same thing. We want engagements. Let's engage. Let's meet each other halfway. If we work together, I believe that we would go to a society as soon as possible that is going to have free, decolonized, quality, and well-resourced education in this current lifetime.
Professor Bauer, the beauty of democracy is that we can have all these institutions and organizations, but if dialogue is not achieved, then what's the point? If there's an institutional problem within the universities, in them not trying to make that dialogue with student organizations, then we are heading for a serious problem. So what needs to be done in order to make sure that democracy is not just a word or a lip service, but it is practiced openly in trying to get this conversation and dialogue open?
I think that's a really critical question. The Higher Education Act actually requires, at the institutional level at least, it requires this kind of dialogue and conversation to take place. I mean, and of course, as you know, students are represented, in various structures and so on. But more importantly, the Higher Education Act also foresees the importance of having forums where different sectors of the university organizations, the institutions, the institutional bodies, if you like, can sit together on an equal kind of playing field. So the institutional forum, for example, is a really critical avenue where that kind of conversation could take place. And where at universities where that kind of facility exists, I mean, one has a sense that there's a much stronger kind of collaboration and so on between the different sectors in the campus, on the campuses. But I think that there's a need for another kind of conversation, and Siyabusa has been kind of referring to that, which is this idea of really having sort of dialogue at the national level, because the solution to this is not going to happen at the universities. Right? Universities are really kind of a part of a system, right? And unless the system is kind of funded in a particular way, the universities aren't going to be able to resolve this issue, and therefore there's a need for us to have avenues, where this kind of conversation can take place. Of course, these conversations have to be respectful and they have to be dealt with in a way that allows people to be open and honest and so on, so that we're not closing down on discussions and that we're opening up the possibility of solutions, that come at us. But it's also a question about, where governments like our government, what is it that they see as the future of our country, right? I mean, I just followed the goings on at the NEC this weekend, the ANC NEC, and I have to ask myself, what are they conceptualizing as the future of our country?
Yeah.
When we can't deal with corruption amongst the highest officials of the governing party, well, what is that future that we are envisaging? So, and it's not just the ANC, by the way. It's also what's going on in the ruling part, in the government. What's happening in the private sector and so on. So, it's also about saying, let's develop a kind of a national dialogue about where we want our society to be. 27 years after we got our freedom, we still don't know what kind of society we want to be.
Well, hopefully we don't
It's
have...
very sad.
Yeah, well, 30 days seems to be the rhetoric, of course, 30 days for members who are accused of corruption to step aside. That's a conversation for another day. Professor Ahmed Bawa and Siyabusa Mnisi, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on Truth to Power. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, that is Siyabusa Mnisi. He's the Deputy President of the SRC at the University of Johannesburg, and Professor Ahmed Bawa. He is the CEO of Universities South Africa. So the question does remain, is government committed to a framework to help our students achieve free decolonized education in our lifetime? That remains the big question. Lots of money has been pumped into SOEs. Lots of money has been pumped into other aspects of society in South Africa. The vaccination, of course, quite important in trying to help curb COVID-19, but we are missing one important aspect, and that is, of course, how do we go ahead and make sure that our students can get proper, world-class quality education. Well, that's all we have for you here on Truth to Power. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again, same time, same place. Take care for this long weekend that is coming up. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.